The stories of West End theatre ghosts have gained tremendous momentum and interest over recent years. There are in total 39 West End playhouses, with the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane the oldest, as it opened in May of 1663. The Savoy was the first to be entirely lit by electricity in 1881, making the most shadowy of corners, nooks and crannies to overall disappear. But the sheer design of theatres, with dark passages and even darker steps to the flies overhead, the narrow, dimly lit causeways under the stage, the giddy heights of the bio box, the lofty follow spot room, the very necessary dimness for prompt corners, stages left and right behind traditional fireproof blackout drapes, the lighting control box, the wings and all associated areas of hush-hush during performances with shadowy figures, often dressed in black, flitting to and from, out of the limelight. That word alone has changed meaning over the past 100 years. Originally referring to the way theatres were lit by heating a cylinder of the mineral lime, resulting in an intensely bright white light, it has now become synonymous as a figurative meaning, at the centre of attention since around 1870. Out of those 39 theatres, I have personally visited or attended all 39 through one capacity or another, but I have actively worked long-term at 6 of them. I had of course heard stories of the West End theatre ghosts for a long time, and continued to do so through my 15 years associated with these special venues. But the top of the pile, the one where I personally had 3 direct experiences of a ghostly nature that I categorically would sign testament to, all took place at the London Palladium. The Palladium was in fact my first venture into theatre, when I bluffed my way in as an impoverished student looking at something more interesting than college with greater experience to offer, and hard cash for a ridiculously sized overdraft. For 10 solid days, I visited the stage door in Great Marlborough Street, now sadly barricaded and fenced for security, and asked each person who passed me by if there were any jobs going. On that 10th day, a giant of a man called Bill Platt, with huge hands, asked what I was hanging around for. I said I was looking for a job. "Can you work limes, darling?" the giant chief of electrics asked. I nodded enthusiastically. I had plenty of experience in that department. "Very well, it's going to be 12 shows a week, 9 quid a show. You go up to the bio box and ask for Linford. Start rehearsals tomorrow." I thanked him, shook his burly hand, and strolled nonchalantly into the corridor, leading from the stage door and down to the very centre of the stage itself. Walking on the dimly lit stage, a tannoid voice asked what I wanted. The query echoed around the enormous auditorium. At 2,286 seats, with an enormous raked and at that time revolving stage, it is in fact the biggest theatre in London. I asked where the bio box was, and after some short instructions, I zigzagged my way to the very top of the gods and made my way up various steps and ladders to what turned out to be a follow spot room with noise-resistant glass and an epic uninterrupted view down to the stage itself. Here I met Linford, a unique character in his own right. I learnt over time that he had begun his Palladium career decades before as a white-gloved Negro usher or page boy, gently guiding the rich and elite of London to their boxes and artists backstage. He was now the governor of the follow spots, the limes chief, and he overviewed a complex collection of ancient pre-World War II Stelmar carbon-burning fire hazards mixed with 2 actual modern electric lights. He promptly asked me to change a set of carbons and set the gap correctly. I shrugged and decided to tell him the truth. Winged it, man. Need the job and experience. Linford pissed himself, reached behind his left ear and produced a half-smoked blunt. Within minutes, we were both in fits of giggles, and I can remember little else of my training. Thus started my career at the Palladium, an awesome period of intense learning, as I shimmied up ladders, dangled cables, and learnt to shoot follow spots by playing target practice on the personal parts of rehearsing and stretching dancers in tiny leotards and leggings, completely unaware as I zapped them for 3 seconds at a time with a light no bigger than a tennis ball. The stars of the show were Jim Davidson, Molly Sugden, Windsor Davies, Melvin Hayes, Clive Dunn, Victor Spinetti, Jackie Redding. It was Dick Whittington, directed by Lionel Blair. There are many tales to tell of this 4-month of theatrical bliss, but the focus of this story is on Palladium ghosts. So let's move on to them and keep the gossip, outrage and tittle-tattle for a different time. However, before we go hardcore Palladium, a brief mention of the ghost stories for 3 of the other 5 theatres I worked in, although from the outset I have only heard these tales of ghostly trails. I had no experiences directly with them. Her Majesty's Theatre on the Haymarket, constructed in 1897 for actor-manager Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree, as not only his theatre but also his home. In later years, he went on to establish the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, that bastion and doyen of prestigious acting schools. It's said that this magnificently named character is responsible for sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, but only in the top box, stage right, left as you look at the stage from the auditorium. He apparently haunts no other part of the theatre, and I have no idea why this chilling spectre is supposed to be Sir Herbert. I worked in this theatre on Amadeus with Frank Findlay and company for a few months, and had wonderful post-matinee, pre-evening performance downtime sitting literally on the roof, staring at the stars and across the road at the brilliantly lit Haymarket. Which leads us usefully on to John Baldwin Buckstone at the aforementioned Theatre Royal Haymarket. This actor wrote, directed and produced literally hundreds of plays, most of them staged at the Haymarket in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Comparatively harmless, he is often seen at various spots around the theatre and watching plays. Worth noting that he has been mentioned by Dame Judi Dench and Patrick Stewart of Star Trek fame, confirming they both saw his likeness on stage during a production of Waiting for Godot in 2009. Again, I have no direct experiences here, despite a long run which included quietly fetching Beryl Reid half bottles of brandy during the breaks and the risky job of changing many of the light bulbs on yet another roof whenever royalty was expected. But many stagehands and directors, in addition to performers, have confirmed sightings of this genial character, particularly at comedies which he truly appreciated. Lastly, it was here that I learnt to listen to the power of Donald Sinden's voice as he regularly yelled down the cast telephone at someone who probably felt the vocal impact more than myself. One last stop before the Palladium itself must be the Theatre Royal on Drury Lane. This ghost is said to only appear during successful shows, meaning most producers prefer to see him than not, as it were. We don't know who he is supposed to be, but he appears dressed in 18th century garb, often in the 4th row of the upper circle. Although he hasn't been identified when the theatre was going through restoration in the 1840s, a skeleton with a knife in its chest wearing shreds of grey clothing was discovered. A gruesome find for some builder for sure, and perhaps this gentleman, after his death and localised burial, does still visit the theatre and watch shows. I never experienced him or heard the tale when I worked there, probably because the best little whorehouse in Texas was truly the worst experience of theatre I have had to plough through. Worse still, because I was dressed in black, operating specific lighting and effects in the circle level of the auditorium, surrounded by complaining theatre attendees who used to boo the actors. This 1981 production staggered on for 204 performances. I left at circa 10. And so to my experiences at the London Palladium, the world's greatest theatre. Before I get ghostly though, I will tell you of the strangest, most bizarre experience I ever had there. This is one of those I kid you not tales, which resulted in my shouting for Linford, who was up the ladder in the den overhead so loudly, members of the audience turned around and started banging on the glass front, but I really had no choice. I was at the far end on my favourite Stelmar follow spot. Running a carbon-burning high-intensity light is a hot job, and I had a bar stool and conveniently placed fan. I was smoking one of Linford's spliffs, strong stuff from Brixham, and my light was fixed on none other than Michael Crawford as he was about to walk the tight wire in Barnum at the end of the first act. It was common for crew members in the know to pop up around the intervals to scrounge a toot. This one evening, a colleague of mine from the fly department turned up, and as Michael finished the tightrope walk and the curtain fell, I killed the spot and handed my spliff to this relatively unknown flyer, and I wandered to the far end of the box to see if Linford wanted a brew of tea. A couple of minutes later, I was returning and stopped dead in my tracks. My first thought was the exorcist. The flyer was totally horizontal, balanced perfectly on my stool, which was centered in the small of his back, and he was revolving, clockwise, with his arms straight by his sides, his hands resting against his hips like a well-placed corpse, and he went round, twice. I was transfixed. Suddenly he rolled over, stiff as a board, fell off the stool, and landed flat on his face with an enormous bang. This crashed me out of my mesmerization, and I yelled, "Linford, epileptic," at the top of my voice. Heads turned in the auditorium, Linford bolted down the ladder, Chris headed for the telephone, and I rolled the unfortunate victim onto his back and watched as he began to come around with blood pouring from his nose. Linford yelled, "Hide the ashtrays!" First aiders arrived, and I selfishly managed to tell the flyer, "Don't say you are stoned," to which he totally agreed and said, "Sorry, man. The show must go on." 10 minutes later, it did. Took another of Linford's joints to calm down for the rest of that production, and nothing Michael Crawford did on that stage for the second half could vaguely compete with the bio-box Exorcist. And so, to the three tales of ghostly Palladium trails. The first two are what I would call so-so experiences when you've had a few contacts in your life. I had made it a ritual to explore different parts of the Palladium, arriving sometimes hours before shows, knowing the place would be empty, and I would wander willy-nilly as I pleased, learning shortcuts, making discoveries in corners long ignored, finding 80 to 100-year-old newspapers tucked in slots and crevasses where long-dead production crew members had had a quiet read and a crafty cigarette in strictly non-smoking areas. I was sitting in Her Majesty's chair in the royal box, eating some chips and a pie, as you do, in a virtually dark theatre, bar safety lighting. My feet were guiltily up on the box wall. I had just had a royal pee in the royal pot, when suddenly two hands were placed on my shoulders and I was squeezed. I carried on eating chips for a few more seconds, assuming in was a fellow crew member, but the hands suddenly disappeared, making me turn at speed. No one was there, not a soul. Well, maybe a soul. The curtains were still open, and I had a direct view of the completely closed door. Zilch. I came to the decision that I had been touched by spirit hands, but it didn't unnerve me enough to halt the chip chewing. I just thought, well, that was different. The second experience came combined with a real-life jolt just shortly before. I was running downside corridors parallel to the main auditorium, dimly lit and void of people, yet I could hear the murmured script going along and knew I had but 2 minutes before the public came out, when I literally bumped headlong into Paul McCartney, Linda and children, making an early exit for the bar. I froze. It was the first and only time I ever froze on meeting a serious celebrity or well-known star, and I've met a lot. In ham manner, I started to search my pocket for a pen, something to sign, and Paul said, "Not now, stage door at the end of show," and we moved on in different directions. As a by-the-by, he didn't turn up. Clearly a get-out-of-jail card phrase to save him hassle. Jazzed up for a while, I finished whatever I was doing in the dressing room areas and chose a different route back to the lighting box, this one private and void of public. Going up some steps, 2 at a time, I was hit hard on the left shoulder as if someone was trying to stop me. A true physical experience, and my first thought was someone telling me to stop running. I was being noisy. Needless to say, I walked the rest of the way, confused by my non-existent assailant. And so we come to the most bizarre of my ghostly experiences at the Palladium. Again, this time, I was at the far end of the bio box on my Stelmar. The empty backup machine was next to me. Third lamp along was Chris on a modern follow spot, and Andrew was on another modern to Chris's left. Linford was rolling a joint and watching on. This was back in Dick Whittington times, and we had cue sheets as to who was coming on, where they would come, and the timing script of the show. So I was waiting for Clive Dunn, he of Dad's Army fame, to appear from the prompt corner, stage left, or as an audience of viewer would perceive the right side of the auditorium. My carbons were perfectly trimmed, immaculately gapped, and I was standing tight to the machine with one hand to the front for control, the left hand to the back of the light to trim the carbons, poised, perfectly ready for Clive's appearance. When suddenly the lamp was pulled forcefully yet smoothly and firmly hard and determined across the stage to the left. I was utterly confused and fought to pull it back to my cue spot, but to no avail. The lamp was no longer in my control as it arced across the stage, and to my horror, the iris opened with my left hand off the control, and it hit the left side of the stage with a full-on person-sized beam of bright white light. And on wandered Clive, from completely the wrong side, and in fairness, I immediately put both hands back on the Stelmar and followed the man resistance-free perfectly. At the same time, I was cranking my head around the back to see who was pushing or pulling my lamp. The other lads and Linford were a good 4 yards away. As soon as I shut down when Clive left the stage, I immediately explored the whole lamp for fishing line, string, a lever, anything where the lads could have conned me. Not a thing. To test it further, I said not a word. And no one knew, except Linford. He said, "Hey, how'd you know Clive was gonna fuck up? Cool job, man." And he handed me yet another of those Brixham blunts. True story, no embellishments, no exaggeration. I'm known for historical rather than hysterical ghost storytelling. Ghostly tales from the greatest theatre in the world. My personal experiences. Spooky,